Good morning, children. This is your host, your friend Akash. Now, children, the previous video to this one was about adjectives. So is this one again. Now, we're going to explore a different phase of adjectives. Now, children, the first slide here on the screen shows you adjectives are graded. Now, children, you get grades, you score marks based on which you get different ranks, based on which your comparisons are made. Now, children, in the same manner, when you are describing quality of a noun or a pronoun, you can definitely compare one noun to another noun or many nouns at once based on a particular quality. For example, what I mean to say here is that let us say if I am comparing two people, A and B, with respect to their weights, I can definitely not compare them on different grounds. The grounds have to be similar, parallel. Now, if I say I am comparing my age to my friend's weight, this is an absurd comparison. It stands no grounds of uh, truthfulness. So, children, you need to understand that adjectives in themselves have got a brief family of gradation. That is, they are graded. Graded, which simply means that there are different levels of comparison that are named differently in the English language so that we get to understand different steps. We get to understand different chronology of adjectives. It's particularly some of those adjectives of quality that showcase, that display, that demonstrate degrees of comparison. When you compare one thing to another, or when you compare several things at once, there are different types of words used. All those words fall under the category of adjectives itself, but then they are differently understood. For example, I've given you a tabular comparison here. Now, what you see here are the three tags called positive, comparative, and superlative. So, these are the three levels of comparison that adjectives see or follow, right? So, in the positive one, that means that's the main adjective. There is no change, no alteration to those adjectives. So, adjective alone stands as the positive category of comparison. When we go to the second category of comparison, where two, particularly two, please mind it, children, when two things are compared, just two things, and of course on the same grounds or on the same levels or on the same platform, then that's called a comparative adjective that we use here. Then the third one is superlative degree of comparison. When we compare more than one, more, or let us say more than two things at the same time, on based on certain similar attributes, then that is known as superlative degree of comparison, but they are always termed under the category of adjectives. For example, if I say in, the comparative is inner, and then the innermost. The second says useful, more useful, and most useful. Little, less, least. Big, bigger, biggest. Good, better, and best. Old, elder, eldest, and then old has got another way to use its comparative and superlative, that is older and oldest. Now, children, when you will categorize these seven into adjectives, you find that the positive degree tell us something about the noun that we are talking or concerned about over here. But then when it comes to the comparative and the superlative degrees, they use different words here that do not have a set pattern. So how to decode, how to decipher this understanding as to when to use most useful, more useful, and when to use es or er or est as the suffix to the adjective itself. There are certain rules that govern the changes in categories or the changes in these chronological order of comparatives. But at the same time, there is some random example as well. There are random adjectives that take up different sorts of forms in order to form their comparatives and superlatives degree of comparison. So, how do you learn all these? You need to have a very intense and a very deep sense of observation. So the more you observe, again, the better you understand. You come across a situation once, you understand it, you comprehend about it, you contemplate about it, and then you reassess it one final time, and you understand that whenever you are up to another situation of the same kind, you know how to move ahead. So that is the basic course that you need to follow every time you come up against such challenges in life. Sorry. Next on the screen, you've got cosmic rules for degrees of adjectives. Now, there are several rules, but these rules fall the same throughout the world. Since I've used the word cosmic, it simply means throughout the world, throughout the cosmos. COSMOS, that means the world itself. So the first rule is for one syllable adjectives. Now, before I go ahead with reading out the rule to you and then explaining it to you, remember the syllables. How does that become important? This is where it comes into play. Syllable simply means tone. So if I'm just using one tone, that means bad, good, hate, etc. So in that case, I'm using one syllable adjectives, right? So for one syllable adjectives, you only need to add an ER at the end to get to the comparative degree, and or you may add EST at the end to get to the superlative degree of the adjective. So if I say bad, it does not become badder. Why? Because it's an exception. It becomes bad, then you've got worse, and then you've got worst. If you remember, in while explaining the previous screen to you, I explained it to you in a manner that there are some random examples as well that choose a particularly different set of words. Right? So how do you get to these? How do you decode such information? You need to stick to the basics. You need to observe and you need to learn and then iterate. That is how you're going to get through. Otherwise, the story is something that is going to turn out very difficult for all of us, right? So one syllable adjectives may use ER at the end to get to the comparative degree, and they may use EST to get to the superlative degree. If I say big, it uses ER in the end. That is bigger and biggest, right? If I say TALL, tall, that's one syllable adjective, tall. Taller, tallest. Fat, fatter, and fattest, right? Alright, children, let's understand rule number 2 now. For two syllable adjectives. Now, children, we've already talked about syllable. We have a thorough understanding of what syllables are. So, based on that, proceedingly, we can say there are several two syllable adjectives. I'll quote a few. For example, if I say peaceful, pleasant, careful, thoughtful, and there are quite others. So for such adjectives which are two syllable adjectives and they don't end in y, or apart from this, for all the three or more syllable adjectives, they use more plus adjectives. That means precedingly a word more is added to get to the comparative degree, whereas another word called most is precedingly added to the adjective itself to get to the superlative degree. So this is how it goes. For example, if I say generous, if I say important, if I say intelligent, so all these have generous will take up more generous as its comparative form. Similarly, most generous for its superlative form. Similarly, if I say important, important becomes more important if we get to the comparative form, whereas more important becomes most important if we want to change it to the superlative degree. So this is how it goes. Now, if I say, let's talk about rule number 3 now. Two syllable adjectives that end in y. Crappy, happy. So happier, happiest. What do? You replace the last letter, that is y, with an er, and for the comparative degree, whereas you replace the same y with an I and you add er for the comparative degree, you replace the y, you add an I for the comparative degree. Whereas you replace the y with an I and then you add an est as a suffix to the same word or to the same adjective for the superlative degree. For example, if I say happy, happier, happiest. If I say friendly, friendlier, friendliest. Then I can also use for friendlier, I can also say it can be more friendly for a comparative degree, whereas it can be most friendly for superlative degree. So this is how it goes. Now, apart from these, there are certain irregular ones as well. So these irregular adjectives don't take up any particular rule. They don't follow or are not governed by any rules that we've discussed so far. For example, if I say good, so good changes to better and best for the respective comparative and superlative degree. Similarly, if I say far, far changes itself to farther and farthest for getting to its comparative and superlative degree. Then similarly, if I say many, so many, more, and most. So this is how it goes. So these are all irregular ones. Now there are certain mandatory situations that we have to follow in according to get to the correct uh, version of these adjectives. Now let's see the first one. Positive forms of adjectives, that means the adjectives themselves. If I say happy, that's the positive form, the adjective itself, happy, then the comparative degree happier, then the superlative degree, that is happiest. So here we are talking about the first tab, that means the positive degree, the adjective itself. So positive forms of adjectives can also be used to compare two things. Now this is just a change of way to use it. Now if I say he is as good as Arijit Singh in singing. Now here we have to lay focus on the word good because that is our primary adjective. I'm using it as itself, that means in the positive form, where we are taught that there is no comparison that can be made using the first degree. But then this is another way of writing it. If you use connectors, if you use similes, so you can come up to a different inference, that is you can use positive degrees of adjectives for comparisons as well. Now I've used here another example, that is he's as good a singer as Arijit Singh is. Now this is a part of life. This is a part of English grammar. This is a speech of English grammar which is contained in the tag called simile. As good as something, as huge as something, as bloated as something, as frightening as something. So this is how it goes, right? So let's take up the example number 2. An athlete is as flexible as a cat. Now here I'm again using it, using the word, the adjective flexible in its first form. Flexible will take up more flexible and most flexible for its comparative and its superlative degree. But here it's being used in its primary form and the comparison is being made. How is it being made? By turning it into a simile, using a group of words, paraphrasing it into a phrase. So this is how it is done. And it is very simple if you practice with a few more adjectives. Let's head to mandate number 2. That means a compulsion number 2. An adjective in comparative degree is often succeeded by the word than. Now this is a connector that is very frequently, not always. It's not always used there, but very frequently it is used when we use the adjective in its comparative form. So if I say Hridesh is taller than Ridhima, if I miss on that word than, the sense of the entire sentence is going to go berserk, it's going to go wrong, right? So Hridesh is taller than Ridhima. The second example says he was always luckier than his brother. The third is this building is older than the one next to it. And the fourth is Tim works harder than any of his colleagues. If you try to pick out that word from any of these sentences, the sense of the sentence will definitely go bizarre. So an adjective in its comparative form will accept than as its successive word. Let's head on to mandate number 3. The article the, if you remember, a, an, and the are the 3 articles that are divided or segregated into 2 major categories called definite articles and indefinite articles. We'll head to that context at a later on stage. The article the is mandatorily used before the occurrence of every superlative degree of adjective in a sentence. Now this is a compulsion. This is something that you miss on and you will definitely go wrong with the sentence. Now, every time you use the third column of the adjective, you are supposed to use the the article called the. It's a mandatory part of English grammar. Let's quote a few examples here. The first is, the best part of mathematics is that it can be practiced until you get to the correct solution. So the best part, I cannot just write best part of mathematics. The has to be there in its as a successive word to the superlative degree of adjective. Now the second sentence is, may the best competitor wins. Radhika is the eldest of all my daughters. The car is the oldest car in my garage. It's not garage, it's garage. Now see, I have also highlighted off in the first sentence, then I've highlighted off again in the third sentence, and then I've highlighted in the fourth sentence. I'm going to give you another rule in the next screen. Mandate number 4. An adjective in superlative degree, that means the third column, is usually succeeded by of or sometimes in, seeing to the need of the preposition in the sentence. Now we don't know until now that what preposition is, because I haven't taught you. So with time and of course with successive chronology, we are definitely going to get into such concepts. All these concepts will have to be covered in order to get to a wholesome English knowledge. Okay, so let's deal with a few examples. So this mandate 4 says that the adjective in the superlative degree in the third column will definitely accept of and in the sentence itself. So the best part of mathematics, if I say the best part about mathematics, all these are correct, but of, about, all these are prepositions that have to be there mandatorily, compulsively. So the best part of mathematics is that it can be practiced until perfection. May the best competitor wins. Radhika is the eldest of all my daughters. This car is the oldest car in my garage. So no matter how many times you use the superlative degree of any adjective in a sentence, you will have to use these prepositions in the sentence itself in order to get to the correct meaning again. Now if I say, let us say there are 5 children sitting in a class, right? And all of them are happy, but their levels of happiness are different. So I can say one person or one student is happier than the other. Then the second student is happier than the other one. So in a way, there has to be one person who has to be happiest of all. So if I say, let us say A, B, C, D and E are their respective names, and E is the happiest person or the student in the class. So I can say E is the happiest person then in the class, of the class, right? So in a way, you have to use preposition after you'll use a superlative degree in a sentence. So that is mandate number 4. Do's and don'ts. Earlier as well, we've discussed do's and don'ts regarding certain things. Here we are discussing do's and don'ts in the context of adjectives. The first is, that's a do. To be performed, to be done, to be noted. Do everything to accumulate. Accumulate means to collect, to gather as many adjectives as possible, because whenever you want to convey something about a situation, about a person, about a place, or about anything at all in this world, you will definitely need adjectives to define what you're trying to convey. If I talk about myself as a person, if I want to tell you, if I'm let us say I'm rude, or let us say I'm polite. So rude and polite again are adjectives. So in order to define everything, you need adjectives. So delve into this category of the sea, of the vast ocean of English, as deep as possible. Then next up we've got don't. Do not use two comparatives together. This is a very oftenly seen mistake that is usually done by the kids, the junior kids, up to class 6, 7 and 8. Now, the first example has been given to you, which is not supposed to be done. This is more larger building than the rest. You either use more with a compatible adjective, or you don't use more at all, because here it is incompatible with this sentence or with this adjective, because larger in itself means the comparison between two is being done, and it's here I am using larger, the comparative degree, to show the comparison between a lot of things. Now what you see here, or what I've told you earlier, is if there is something That is the best out of the all. You have to use the superlative degree, but here we are using the comparative degree. But still, we are making a comparison between a lot of things. Now, this is a larger building than the rest. So that means we have now hereby assessed a lot of buildings. It is not being done between two buildings. It's being done, the comparison is being made between a lot of buildings. And out of all those buildings, there is one which has been pointed out using a demonstrative called this. We've done this already. So this is pointing out at a particular building, and it says that this is a larger building than the rest. So one building, the one that we are focusing on, that is the largest of all, has been taken as one object, whereas the rest has been clubbed together and taken as another object. So in this way, we land to a concept that we are using just two objects, where one object is the building that is the biggest, and the second is the rest of the buildings taken together as one. All right, next. He is more old, more elder. Both are wrong. If you say he is old than all the other students of the class, again, it's wrong. You have to use elder or older. Usually use elder. Why? Because we are talking in terms of age. We're not talking in terms of its years of existence, right? So he is elder than all the other students of the class. Vivan is a better player than Gaurav in the team. Do you see that the word, the third last word in the sentence, that is in, it's a preposition. So every time you reflect to a situation using an adjective, you'll have to use the preposition. This is the bottom line. So Vivan is a better player, is a much better player. It would have been correct, but more is wrong here because more is a quantitative adjective. So Vivan is a much better player than Gaurav in the team. So do's and don'ts have to be taken extra care of, and you are good to go. So finally, I bid you good health and please stay healthy. Thank you all.